The first shots in this escalating economic standoff were not fired from Beijing, but from Brussels. In early 2025, the European Union took a bold and unprecedented step, signaling a shift in its approach to global power dynamics. The European Union announced targeted sanctions against several major Chinese state-owned banks, citing growing concerns over dual-use technologies, goods and services that could be used for both civilian and military purposes, reaching embargoed nations. This move was intended to curb the flow of sensitive technology and reinforce Europe's stance on international security. Many observers saw this as Europe bowing to mounting U.S. pressure, despite deep reservations from economic heavyweights like Germany and France, who worried about the potential backlash on their own industries and the broader European economy. The sanctions, while headline-grabbing, were largely symbolic, carefully crafted to send a stern warning to Beijing without destabilizing the global financial system or causing immediate economic turmoil within Europe itself. China's response was swift and precise. Rather than retaliate broadly, Beijing zeroed in on Lithuania, imposing strict regulatory scrutiny on transactions involving Lithuanian banks, and by extension, any major European bank with operations there. This targeted approach allowed China to demonstrate its displeasure while avoiding a direct confrontation with the entire EU. This move exploited existing divisions within the EU, highlighting the bloc's internal disagreements and sending a chilling message. Beijing could inflict pain on individual members without triggering a full-blown trade war with the entire Union. By isolating Lithuania, China effectively tested the EU's commitment to mutual defense and solidarity in the economic sphere, raising questions about how far member states would go to protect one another under external pressure. This opening exchange set the stage for a much larger confrontation, pulling Europe into a complex conflict it was unprepared to navigate, and signaling that the era of economic diplomacy had entered a far more unpredictable phase. Washington's pressure on Europe to confront China and the BRICS alliance has been relentless, intensifying with every new global development. American officials are urging their European counterparts to take a firmer stance, framing the situation as a defining moment for the West. The U.S. sees the rise of BRICS and the growing talk of de-dollarization as a direct threat to its global power and financial dominance. The possibility of the dollar losing its status as the world's reserve currency is a scenario Washington is determined to prevent. American diplomats remind Europe of its security dependence on NATO, emphasizing the alliance's role in protecting the continent. At the same time, they warn of the risks posed by Chinese technology, from 5G networks to critical infrastructure, painting a picture of vulnerability if Europe strays too far from Washington's orbit. The message is clear. In this new era of great power competition, neutrality is not an option. Europe is being told it must choose a side, and the consequences of hesitation could be severe. Europe faces a painful choice: side with its traditional security guarantor, the United States, or protect its vital economic interests, especially its deep trade ties with China. The debate is fierce, with leaders split on the best path forward. The EU's prosperity depends heavily on exports, especially to China, making a US-style decoupling not just difficult, but economically dangerous. Billions in trade and millions of jobs are at stake. Germany's manufacturing sector, the continent's economic engine, would be hit hardest by any disruption. Its world-class industries rely on Chinese markets and supply chains, making the stakes even higher for Berlin. The US can afford a trade war with China. Its economy is more insulated. Europe, however, cannot. The risks of economic fallout are far greater for the EU, threatening growth and stability. This tension is playing out across European capitals, as leaders weigh the costs of alienating rising powers like China versus appeasing an unpredictable ally in Washington. The political and economic stakes are enormous. The pressure from Washington forces Europe to consider sacrificing its own economic interests for the sake of transatlantic unity. The dilemma is deepening, with no easy answers in sight. The calculus is grim, and the stakes are only rising. Europe stands at a crossroads, with its future hanging in the balance as global power dynamics shift rapidly. Italy's experience reveals the painful trade-offs of this new era, where economic ambition and geopolitical realities collide more than ever before. Once the only G7 nation to join China's Belt and Road Initiative, Italy hoped Chinese investment would revive its stagnant economy and spark a new era of growth and innovation. The acquisition of Pirelli by ChemChina symbolized this engagement, representing a bold step toward deeper ties. But as global tensions rose, Rome intervened to limit Chinese influence, citing national security and the need to protect strategic industries. Italy's pivot away from China, under pressure from the US and EU, has come at a cost. Exports to China have faltered, and businesses face growing uncertainty about their future in a shifting global landscape. The dream of economic revitalization through Chinese capital has collided with the hard edge of geopolitical reality, leaving many Italian companies caught in the crossfire. Italy's story is a warning. Playing both sides is no longer tenable in a world where alliances are being tested and redrawn. Governments everywhere are being forced to choose between Washington and Beijing, sacrificing potential economic opportunities for the sake of geopolitical alignment and long-term security. Even seemingly benign foreign investment can become a political liability overnight, as shifting alliances turn yesterday's deals into today's controversies. As Europe hardens its stance on China, the economic pain once felt in Italy is spreading across the continent, with more countries now facing similar dilemmas and difficult choices. The reckoning with the true cost of alliance is now unavoidable, forcing leaders to confront the reality that every choice comes with its own set of risks and sacrifices. The specter of a second Trump presidency looms over the global economy. Trump threatens universal tariffs on imports, targeting countries that challenge the dollar's dominance. His strategy forced nations to choose between the dollar system or economic isolation. For Europe, this would be catastrophic. Its export-driven economy would suffer, especially if punitive tariffs are imposed on those engaging with BRICS alternatives. European leaders, fearing Trump's wrath, have rushed to align with Washington, hoping to avoid the worst. This is a strategy born of fear, not conviction. Europe is sidelining its own economic priorities to stay in America's good graces. The threat of U.S. economic warfare is real, and Europe's options are narrowing. The continent is caught between defending its interests and appeasing an unpredictable ally. China's targeting of Lithuania was a calculated move with deep implications. Lithuania's decision to allow a Taiwanese office in Vilnius provoked Beijing, which responded with a trade embargo and pressured multinationals to cut ties. The EU's response, legal action and anti-coercion measures, proved slow and ineffective. Lithuania's economy suffered, and European companies grew wary of sourcing from the Baltic state. China's latest move, scrutinizing transactions involving Lithuanian banks, created headaches for Europe's financial sector. This exploited the seams in the EU's single market, turning a political dispute into a financial crisis. China's message: it can punish dissenters and test EU unity with targeted, sophisticated pressure. The Lithuanian episode exposes the limits of European solidarity against a determined superpower. Europe's vulnerability in this conflict is rooted in deep dependence on China. Germany and other major economies rely on China as their largest market for cars, machinery, and more. European industries depend on Chinese supply chains for everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals. The pandemic exposed these fragile links, but little has changed. Europe's green transition is also at risk. China dominates the supply of rare earths, solar panels, and batteries. This dependence leaves Europe in a weak negotiating position compared to the US. For America, a trade war with China is painful but survivable. For Europe, it could be devastating. Decoupling would risk recession and derail key policy goals. Europe's economic reality forces it to tread carefully between Washington and Beijing. The BRICS group has evolved into a powerful bloc, now including major energy producers and regional powers. Their shared mission reduced dependence on the US dollar and Western financial institutions. The BRICS bank funds projects in local currencies and new payment systems bypass the dollar. This push for de-dollarization is both defensive and strategic. Members want economic sovereignty and protection from US sanctions. For Europe, this shift is both a challenge and an opportunity. The rise of alternative systems accelerates global fragmentation, but could offer Europe more autonomy. If a viable non-dollar system emerges, Europe could diversify its economic relationships. For now, Europe remains anchored to the dollar, watching as BRICS builds a new order. The world is moving toward competing blocs, and Europe risks being left behind. The question is whether Europe will adapt or remain a bystander. As 2025 ends, Europe faces a stark choice. Following Washington's lead has brought high energy costs, shrinking trade, and economic stagnation. The US-China tech war threatens Europe's high-tech sector, with American export controls and the risk of massive tariffs. Europe is forced to choose comply with US demands and lose access to China, or defy Washington and face penalties. The old transatlantic partnership now feels like subservience, with Europe bearing the costs of America's rivalries. The world is reorganizing into new power blocks, and Europe must decide its place. It has the weight to be a major pole in a multipolar world, but only if it asserts its own interests. The alternative is to become a passive battleground in others' conflicts. Will Europe reclaim its sovereignty or accept a diminished future? The decisions made now will echo for generations.